So, what are the chances of getting out today?
The van still won't start. Larry's working on it.
Wouldn't you know it? Can I buy you a drink?
Okay.
Jim Beam, ice, water.
For you, miss?
Sweet vermouth on the rocks with a twist, please.
What are the chances of getting out of town today?
The van still won't start. Larry's working on it.
Oh, wouldn't you know it? Can I buy you a drink?
Okay.
Sweet vermouth, rocks with a twist, please.
For you, miss?
The same. That's my favorite drink.
Mine, too. It always makes me think of Rome. The way the sun hits the buildings in the afternoon.
Well, what should we drink to?
To the groundhog.
I always drink to world peace.
Can I buy you a drink?
Okay.
Sweet vermouth, rocks with a twist, please.
For you, miss?
The same. That's my favorite drink.
Mine, too. It always makes me think of Rome. The way the sun hits the buildings in the afternoon.
Well, what should we drink to?
I like to say a prayer and drink to world peace.
To world peace.
World peace. Amen.
Some of you aren't old enough to appreciate the humor from a classic movie, right? But there's times that we wish we could be Bill Murray in Groundhog Day and do it over, to get a redo, to have another chance, right? We've all had moments, we've all had instances where, like, man, I wish I could just go back and say that again or do that again. And it can be funny, or sometimes it can be serious. You know, as I've been thinking about this talk for the past few weeks, I was reminded, again, these things come out of nowhere. I remember when I was in elementary school, right? Now, just a couple years ago, decades ago, and when I was in elementary school, and I remember, I had vivid memories as I was thinking about this. There was a kid in elementary school, his name was Josh, I can remember his name, that for some reason, I don't even know why, we picked on this kid. Like, we would call him names, and we were really cruel to this kid, Josh. And here I am, all of these decades later, and I look back to Josh and I go, I wish I could go back to elementary school, not really from the school part, but I wish I could go back to elementary school, and instead of being the one that picks on Josh, I wish I could stand up for Josh. Right? We all have these moments, these times where we go, man, I wish I could do it over, right? You've had those times where as you're talking, and you know this, like as you're talking, you're like, I wish I could just grab those words as they're coming out of my mouth because I know they're not good. And I wish I could just take them and put them back in, right? Because the moment you say it, you go, idiot. And you feel that regret. And if we're honest, we all have regrets, right? And if we're honest, we all have moments, we all have times where we go, I just wish I could be like Bill Murray and just go and get a do-over and do it again. I wish I could go back in time and take back those words, take back those actions. Maybe you think of that time, that one year on spring break, and I don't know what got into you, but I can't believe I did that. What was I thinking? Remember that time that your temper flared, right? And you were angry and you said things and you did things and maybe you threw things. And you're like, I'm not proud of that. I wish I could go back and redo that. You ever said this? I've said this to myself. I should have never gone there. I knew better. You ever said that? I knew better, but you did it anyway. For some of us, you know, when you finally meet the one, the love of your life, the one that you want to spend the rest of your life with, it's like, I wish I could just go back to previous relationships and undo some things that I did. I wish I could just undo that and redo and start over. Maybe there was a time when words came out of your mouth and those words were so deep and so penetrating that it broke the relationship. The person on the other end of your words, it hurt the relationship so bad that maybe even after months and years, it's just not the same. The relationship is still not recovered. My question to you and to me today is, what do you do with this kind of regret? I don't know about you, but sometimes I feel like it's like a big weight that's kind of on your shoulders, and you feel the weight of it, the heaviness of it. And yeah, if I could go back and do it over again, I would do it. If I could do it differently, I would do it differently. But what do you do? And then here we are. It's Easter Sunday, right? So it's Easter Sunday, and we're at church, and maybe this was a prerequisite for brunch, so you had to be here. But here we are, right? And isn't the idea of church that to make you feel guilty? Like, isn't that kind of what churches are supposed to do, right? Just make you feel bad, to kind of beat up on you and kind of throw some shame at you and some guilt at you. And if you feel bad enough, right? If I can make you feel bad enough, then maybe you will need God. Is that kind of how it happens? I know some people actually like that. They're like, oh yeah, I like to go and feel guilt and shame. That makes me feel better somehow. And I'm like, you should see a therapist, but I don't really know what to say to you. But for me, and I know for many of us, that idea, that guilt and shame, that actually makes me want to run. And maybe you've run away from God and you've left the church. But what if that's really not the idea at all? If that's not really the idea of church? What if our perspective of God is somehow misguided or misinformed? And maybe despite of what we were taught as kids, or maybe even what we experienced at some kind of church or maybe in some kind of family setting, what if God is not trying to pile us on with guilt and shame? What if God is not like trying to make you feel bad? Like maybe God's purpose is not to make you feel bad. But what if instead of that, God actually moves toward you or moves toward me or moves toward those of us who own it, who just acknowledge it. You know what? I've messed up. I've made mistakes. I've said things. I've done things. I've been places. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. Like what if instead of guilt and shame, God actually moves toward those of us who've messed up? Like those of us who feel remorse or those of us who feel regret and who carry that around. And maybe many of us have been taught it somewhere along the way, or we picked it up somewhere, that God condemns us or God runs away from us if we've made mistakes. But what if the reality is different? Like what if God actually moves toward us with the intent, with the purpose of restoration, with the purpose of healing? And so if you have any regrets, if you have any remorse, if you've hurt people, if you've done things you wish you could go back and redo, then today is for you. And today is for me because I am in that category. And here's what I just want to do in just a couple of minutes this morning is I want to look at two stories that I believe really they're going to illustrate and demonstrate a God who moves toward, a God who seeks restoration, a God who offers healing. And the stories come about a guy named Peter. And so even if you're not a church person, maybe you're not super familiar with the Bible, you probably heard of Peter. There's probably bits and parts of his story that you know. And so let me just give you a little bit of a background so we're all on the same page. Peter was a fisherman by trade. So he made his living fishing. And then one day comes along, he decides to follow Jesus. Now, most of you know that Jesus had what were called 12 disciples. These were people that followed and walked with Jesus for the 3 years that he was doing ministry, and they saw everything, right? They were just with him basically all the time. And so Peter was one of these 12. That's Peter. He's in this 12. Not only that, you may know this, but Jesus also had a smaller, more intimate group of people, the three. There were three of them, Peter, James, and John. Peter was one of the three. So Peter and Jesus are bros. I'm trying to just let you know, like they're close. Like Peter was with Jesus hours upon hours upon hours. They were together a lot. And a lot of the stories we talk about here at Miami Church, a lot of the stories we read in the New Testament, Peter was there. He like had a front row seat to all of this. And so here is Peter, and there comes kind of to a point kind of toward the end of this 3-year journey they're on together that Jesus gets arrested. So Jesus is arrested, and obviously if you're following somebody, let's say that somebody you're really close to, that you're following, they get arrested, well, obviously that's going to cause a lot of turmoil and chaos in your life. And so Jesus gets arrested. So here's Peter. Now all of a sudden he's scared, he's uncertain, and so he is going to kind of see what happened, but he's cautious, right? Because there's a lot of crazy stuff going along. And so I want to give you the scene. Here's the scene. And luckily for us, there was a doctor, actually a medical doctor, named Luke, who was Greek. He was not even Jewish, he was Greek. And Luke says, well, hey, here's what I did. I went around and I interviewed hundreds of people. And I interviewed eyewitnesses, and I took all of their accounts, and I recorded it in a book. And we now know the book is the Gospel of Luke. And he recorded it in a book, and luckily for us, he records this story with Peter. And so it's found in Luke 22, and you'll see it here. Hannah's going to throw it up on the screen for us. Here's the story, right? So Jesus is arrested. So they arrest him, that's Jesus. And they lead him to the high priest's home, and Peter followed at a distance. Okay, so you can see that Luke is saying, hey, Peter is got some trepidation, man. He's following, but he's really cautious, right? He's really cautious. And then 55 says that the guards lit a fire in the middle of the courtyard. So it was this courtyard at the high priest's house. And they sat around it, and Peter joined them there. Okay, so they're all warming by the fire. Peter kind of slides into the fire. He's playing it low key. He quietly slides in, and then look what happens at 56. It says, a servant girl noticed him in the firelight and began staring at him. You know, like when you're at a grocery store or somewhere and you see someone and you're like, I think I know you from somewhere, but you can't quite connect the dots where I know. And you're looking at them and you're trying to act like you're not, but you're staring at it. It's awkward. Don't do it. By the way, it's awkward. Don't people look. No, I'm kidding. But don't do it. This is kind of what's happening, right? Is people she's looking at Peter and she's like, I know you from somewhere. And then look what she says. She says, this man is one of Jesus's followers. You got to think, Peter is scared, right? I mean, he's been following this guy for years, and now all of a sudden he's arrested. What's going to happen? And he's got to be thinking, hey, they just arrested Jesus, and I'm one of his 12. In fact, I'm one of his 3. And if they can arrest Jesus, if they can get to Jesus, they can sure as get to me because I'm a nobody. And so he's fearful. He's scared. And then this girl goes, hey, you're with him. You're one of those Jesus people. Look what he says, 57. Peter denied it. He says, woman, I don't even know him. Right? You can just hear him say, what are you talking about? Who are you? Why are you talking to me? I don't know him. What are you talking about? Luke keeps writing. He says in verse 58, he says, after a while, someone else looked at him and said, you must be one of them. You're one of those Jesus people. Peter's like, how is this happening? I'm trying to low-key it here by the fire. I'm trying to chill out, just stay warm. And these people keep calling me. You're one of them. Look how Peter responds. This time, I think, with a little more emphatic, a little more strength. He says, no, man, I'm not. I'm not. I'm not. Luke tells us that some time went by. In fact, he says an hour passed in 59. He says an hour later. He probably thought he was in the clear, right? Because, an hour, like, okay, good, I got through that. A third person, another person, comes up. And this guy says, this must be one of them. You must be one of them, because he is a Galilean too. He had the look. He had the accent. He had the look. He's like, hey, you got to be one of the Jesus guys, because you're from that region up there by the Sea of Galilee. Look how Peter responds in verse 60. Peter says, man, I don't know what you're talking about. You can feel by now, like his blood pressure was up, right? He was strong. He's like, what are you talking about? I am not. Absolutely not. And then look how Luke records. He says, immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. Instantly, immediately. You know this feeling, right? I've had this feeling immediately. Like you do something, like as soon as the words come out of your mouth, you're like, oh, idiot. I shouldn't have said that. Right? As soon as you hit send, you ever done that? You hit send. As soon as your finger hits send, you're like, oh, get that back. Right? I shouldn't have sent that. Right? As soon as you click on that website, you're like, I should not have clicked. And Peter goes, this is not good. Not good. Immediately. And then it even gets worse. Look what happens next. It says, at that moment, like this instantaneous moment, it says, at that moment, Jesus turned and looked at Peter. So somehow he's up on a balcony looking down, and they make eye contact, and suddenly Jesus' words flash through Peter's mind. Before the rooster crows tomorrow morning, you will deny 3 times that you even knew me. See, just the night before, just a few hours earlier, Jesus had looked Peter in the face. And he says, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. You know what Peter did? He looked at Jesus and he said, you are crazy. You are nuts. I will never deny you. In fact, not only will I not deny you, I will go to prison with you, I will die with you, but I will never deny you. And then look what he says. Peter left the courtyard weeping bitterly. He's devastated. Devastated. It's like, I did what I said I would never do. I've blown it. I screwed it all up. I mean, years of relationship, years of building trust, years of serving together, years of trying to do good, years. And in this moment, in these hours, I blew it. I wish I could do it over. I wish I could take these couple hours and just go back in time and redo these hours because I have blown it. And this isn't a movie. This is real. This is real life. So what do you do when you've blown it? I mean, what do I do when you're experiencing regret and remorse? What do you do? And you're sitting here, it's Easter Sunday, right? And some of you walked in here and you go, that relationship that I never thought would be broken. I mean, we started with so much hope and so much promise, but now that relationship is broken. Like, what do? You never thought you'd have an ex. Maybe you came in here this morning and you're just separated from your parents, and it's a holiday, and holidays are hard because friends and family are separated. It's broken. In fact, there's so much tension, you can't even have a conversation because every single conversation ends with somebody raising their voice. Maybe you've been betrayed by a boss, a coworker. Somebody made promises to you. Oh, yeah, man, we're going to do this and that. Absolutely, right? And they never intended to keep those promises. Maybe you've betrayed a friend, someone you care deeply about. Like, what do you do? What do you do with remorse? What do you do with regret? What do you do when relationships are broken? What do you do when you're angry and distraught? Like, what do you do? I think what's interesting, it's a great example from Peter's. What I find is one of the things we do is we just kind of go back to what we know. We go back to maybe some stuff we did earlier in our life. And for Peter, before Jesus was ever on the scene, Peter was a fisherman. And so what does Peter do? It's broken, it's ruined, there's pain. What does Peter do? He says, I'm going fishing. I'm going fishing. And John, another follower of Jesus, records it for us. And he says that Peter rallied some of his buddies. He said, that's all screwed up. Let's just go fishing. And so they go out fishing one night. And they go out and they fish all night. And John says they caught nothing. But at about daybreak, right, as the sun is coming up, they're fishing. And John says they're about 100 yards or so off the shore. And they look, and in the distance, they can see someone standing there. And this person yells out to them. And he yells out to them and he says, children, do you have any fish? That's kind of an odd word, the original language there. It's a word of endearment. It's a word of like very familiar, very personal. And he says, hey, children, did you catch anything? And I guess they've been away from fishing too long because they're like, no, we didn't catch anything. And Jesus, again, they can't see that it's Jesus, but he kind of yells back and he says, hey, throw the nets on the other side of the boat, like on the right side of the boat. Throw the nets over there. And so they do. And John tells that they have this huge haul of fish. In fact, he gets real specific. He says there's 153 large fish. And there's so many they can't even get them in the boat. And somewhere in all of this, it clicks in John's head. And he looks and he goes, that dude on the beach. And he looks over at Peter and he says, Peter, that's Jesus. That's the Messiah. That's the Son of the living. That's him. And Peter, in his fashion, he jumps out of the boat at that point. Forget fish, forget all this, he jumps out of the boat and swims as fast as he can. He swims toward the beach. He swims toward Jesus, and he gets there, and there's this crazy scene. He gets there, and Jesus has built a fire, and he's cooking breakfast. He's got fish, and he's made a little campfire, and he's cooking breakfast. And Peter gets there, and it's that moment. It's that moment. Just a few days ago, Peter had denied. I don't know. He had emphatically denied that he knew Jesus. And now here they are. It's Peter and Jesus. And they're face to face. You know that feeling? You know when you know you've wronged someone or you've said something or done something, and there's that moment where you need to go back, right? You know that moment where you need to go, and you need to go look somebody in the eyes and tell them that you're sorry. You need to own it. And I don't know about you. I mean, you guys are probably better than I am, but my initial response is to try to postpone that as long as possible, right? To try to push it off, to try to push it down. Like if I could just, weave around for a little while before I have to do that. You ever been like at a grocery store somewhere and there's like something, tension or something between you and someone, and you see them at a distance, right? And you're like, I do not want to talk to them. And you take your cart and you head down a different aisle, or you head out to the car, right? And you're out of there. But here's the thing with Jesus. See, unlike me, unlike you, Jesus doesn't run away from his betrayer. He pursues. And Jesus seeks out. He moves toward. And Jesus has a purpose or an intent to restore. And so here's Jesus and Peter. And this is their first time that they're together. And here's kind of this conversation. And luckily for us, John records this conversation. And I'll show it to you. It's on the screen. John records it in John chapter 21. It says this. It says, after breakfast, Jesus and Simon Peter, right, they're having this conversation. And so Jesus talks to Peter. And here's what he says. He says, Simon, son of John. Let's like his formal name. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, what we get from this passage is they've had their little breakfast, that Jesus and Peter kind of go on a little walk together, right? This is one-on-one time. And you can see underlying this entire conversation is the fact that, hey, Peter, just a few days ago, man, I told you that you were going to deny me. You told me you would not deny me. You said you would die for me, but you did. Here's Peter like, yeah, I did. I'm sorry, I screwed up. And so Jesus has this conversation. Peter, do you love me? You see, he says, yes, Lord. You know I love you. And Jesus says, then feed my lambs. Verse 16, John says, they say it again. Jesus repeated the question. It's the second time. He says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Yes, Lord, Peter said, you know that I love you. Then take care of my sheep. Verse 17, he says, a third time, he asked him, Simon, son of John, Peter, do you love me? 3 times. Now, at first pass, you're like, yo, man, why do you just repeat yourself? You sound like my 3-year-old, just saying the same thing over and over again. But see, there was a lot of intentionality here. Jesus knew what he was doing because Jesus was meeting Peter's 3 denials with 3 affirmations. Jesus said, hey, I get it, man. You denied me 3 times. Guess what? I'm going to affirm you 3 times. And in the moment, I don't think Peter, he didn't fully get it. In fact, he tells us that Peter was hurt that Jesus asked him a 3rd time. He says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. He says, feed my sheep. And here's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, Peter, it's not over. It's not over. It's still on. Your story, Peter, our story, it's not over. The last chapter has not been written. And Jesus does something amazing here that everything Peter thought it's over. Peter thought, I've thrown it all away. I've blown it. I've destroyed it. It's lost forever. And Peter, in this moment, in this conversation on the beach, says, I love you. I love you, Peter, and I'm about restoration, and I'm restoring us, I'm restoring you, I'm restoring all of this. And then he even goes beyond. He says, not only am I restoring our relationship, Peter, but you are such value and worth. I, Peter, am calling you to something greater and bigger. Not only am I restoring Peter, but I'm giving you opportunity to be part of something way bigger purpose and bigger meaning. It's not over. In fact, not only is it not over, I'm just getting started. And I think these 2 stories, if you step back a little bit and you look at them, they really give us some insight into who God is. And despite maybe what you were taught, despite maybe even what you've experienced and felt, what kind of God is this? What kind of God cooks breakfast on the beach for someone who's betrayed him? I mean, clearly we see a God who wants a relationship. Clearly here we see a God of love. Clearly we see a God who knows your name. This is a God who will not allow your past to define your future. This is a God who's more interested in your future than he is in your failings and in your mistakes. Here's a way to frame it. I think this is a great way to frame it. What kind of God builds the future on a man who betrayed him in the past? What kind of God? You wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that, right? What the old saying is, the best indicator of the future is what happened in the past, right? You ever heard that, right? What kind of God builds a future on a man who denied him 3 times after he said he would? Maybe you're here this morning and you're like, Greg, you don't understand. I mean, I used to believe, but man, some things I've said, some things I've done, thoughts I've had about God. Greg, there's just no way. There's no way God would ever take me back. Greg, you don't understand the depths. I mean, it's cute. You're up there. It looks smooth. That's cool. But you just don't know. You just don't know how deep the addiction is, Greg. Greg, you just don't know how many people I've hurt. You just don't know how broken I am, Greg. You just don't know how far I am from God. And I may not. But here's what I clearly see from Peter, is that Jesus doesn't run away from betrayers. He actually restores them. He had every right to move away from Peter, to go the opposite way, but instead he moves toward him. And on Easter Sunday 2019, here's what this means for me and for you. It means that your betrayal does not mean that it's over. It also means that your past, whatever it is not a death sentence on your future. I have this friend who has a little office down where I study, and his name's Julio. And Julio, he's a crazy guy. And Julio, I've invited him to Miami Church several times and had several conversations with him. I see him almost every week, multiple times a week. And every time I talk to Julio, you know what he says to me? You've probably heard this before. He says, Greg, there's no way I can come to Miami Church. There's no way I can come to Miami Church because the minute I walk through the door, he says, the roof will collapse. You ever heard anybody say that to you? And I'm like, well, I think we're pretty strong. I'm no engineer, but I mean, just looking at here, I'm feeling pretty structurally safe here. I mean, this building's been through tons of hurricanes. I think we're okay. Right? But what's he saying? Right? He's not really saying anything about our structure. Right? He's saying, Greg, I've done stuff. I've said stuff. I've been places. There's no way. I'm too far gone, Greg. I'm too far removed. I'm so deep into this. There's just no way that God could ever love me. And I want to go, that's not the God I know. That's not the God that I see respond to Peter. That's not my experience. My experience says that Jesus doesn't run from betrayers, that he actually restores, that Jesus restores, that Jesus is about healing. And that's why today we celebrate Easter, right? We celebrate because no matter who you are or what you've done, no matter whatever your regrets or your remorse, whatever you wish you could do over, have a redo, whatever shame or guilt you're feeling, whatever that is, Jesus says, hey, your past, all of that is not a death sentence on your future. That there is hope. In fact, the reason we started this church is a couple of years ago, a small group of people just said, hey, we just believe that there's this good God who loves us, and he wants to offer hope and restoration and life and love. And yes, man, we're just a bunch of hurting, broken people, and we don't have it all together, and we're not perfect. In fact, if you're perfect, you don't even need to be here. You can leave. It's just for us. But yet God sees all of that. He sees you. He sees me. He knows, and he still says, I love you. I love you. And I believe the message of Easter is that you don't need the do-over or redo. I mean, it's a cute movie, right? It's funny, right? But you don't need a do-over. You don't need a redo. You can't go back. What's done is done. And yes, there's things that you've done, there's things I've done, there's things I've said, there are places I've been. There's a lot of stuff, if I could, I would do it over again. But you don't really need a do-over. What you need and what I need is restoration that can only be found in a relationship with Jesus. And that's the message of Easter. I believe that Jesus was dead and now that Jesus is alive, right? We can talk about the historical fact that Jesus was dead and now he's alive. It's the resurrection. And that's great. I fully believe that. But more important than even that is the idea that if he is alive, there are implications for you and me. And one of the implications, if he is alive, is that he wants to be in a relationship with you. And just like Peter, instead of running and going away, Jesus moves towards you. He pursues you. And no matter what, he comes towards you and seeks restoration and he seeks healing. Can I just say a prayer over you this morning? God, I love this story. I love this idea. I mean, Peter just screwed up. I mean, there's no way to mix the words there. He just messed up. I mean, he did exactly what he said he would not do. He hurt you, God. He said things. He went the opposite way, God. But yet, in the midst of that pain and regret and remorse, you pursued him. And so, God, I'll just own, I don't fully understand how, God, you're so loving that even when we betray you and even when we do things we know are not right and when we hurt people and do things out for ourselves and not for others, you still move toward us with love. So, God, I pray this message that we're reading will move just past kind of intellectually, but will seep down into the core of who we are, into our hearts and our soul. Because, God, this is the kind of God you are. And you're here now and available to us. And so, God, I thank you for these men and women who are here on this Easter. It's not an accident, mistake. And, God, may your restoration and healing penetrate all of us this morning. We love you now. We pray this because of Jesus.